Well, every Sunday afternoon we had singing at the Christian church. The community sang, went down there and sang. And we came out of singing that afternoon, it's on a Sunday, and somebody said that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. I'd never heard of Pearl Harbor, never. And at that time, the only thing I could think of when they did go ahead, and I realized we was in a war, they were taking 21-year-old. And I said, well, I'll never get in it. I was 17. There was no hope of me getting in it, and I wanted to go. But I wasn't the only one. I think everybody in the United States, every boy that could, wanted to go to serve his country. At that time, it didn't strike me, the enormity of what it was. It was later on when we started seeing boys from my community leaving, and we started at that time that you couldn't get everything you wanted. Rationing started, and then you saw the pinch, and you saw what people started doing, and you saw at our time here, we were a farming community, and Alcoa came in and built a Hurricane Creek plant, and then everybody left the farm to start work in war industries. A lot of them went to Jacksonville, and then you could see what was happening because you were the things that you were used to, you didn't do anymore. The frivolous things. It was strictly, you got down to the point that you knew then that you had to do something or else because we were just losing so many boys. And the newspapers, we didn't have, there was a community radio, but we didn't have radios per se in each home back then. And the newspapers, all it was telling about was defeats. We were being defeated at every turn, so then you knew the enormity of the war. Well, I was among the first 18-year-olds. I went on December the 26th, 1942, to Sheridan. And that's where you went down to the, what am I trying to say, anyhow, I went down, signed up, and I went back to school, and in May, early May, they transferred my blood. I had to have a blood sample, and I was supposed to have gotten it in Grant County, and they had to transfer me to Washington County. So I was about a month behind the first 18-year-olds to go in. Had my physical on the 7th day of July, 1943, and passed, and they asked if I wanted Navy or Army, and I said Army. And so I was sworn in that day, and when I got home, the first thing Mother and Dad told me was, don't get in the Air Force. There'd been a B-17 crash between here and Sheridan, Arkansas, and killed all aboard, and they told me not to get in the Air Force. So I went up the 21st day of July is the day I had to report to Camp Robinson, and we had to take a test. Everybody did when they came in, the Army entrance test. And about the 3rd day or 4th, they called a group of us in, and I didn't know what I'd done. I said, well, you fouled up again, old boy. But what it was, they said we passed high enough to get into the cadet course if we wanted to. A lot of them didn't, but boy, I grabbed that. And I got into the Air Force that way. That's how I got into the Air Force. Done just exactly what Mom and Dad told me not to do, because 18-year-olds know everything. I went on to Amarillo, Texas for my basic training, and then we had a psychomotor and psychological test, 8 hours each day. One was mental and one physical, and I passed good enough to go on into the cadet program. Some didn't make it for various reasons. And I was sent to Stevens Point, Wisconsin cadet program to Central State Teachers College. And I'd been there 4 months, and one Sunday night we came in, and we had leave on Sundays. And I came in, and the lieutenant went around and told all of us, said the ones that volunteered for flying need to meet out in the hall. So I had volunteered to fly. Well, we got out there, and he said, I can't tell you any other way than this. You're no longer in the cadet program. They had a cutback of 38,000 out of the cadet program. I was fortunate enough that I had never been in the Army. Some of them had transferred to the Army or to the Air Force, went back to the Army, and I stayed into the Air Force, and they gave us 4 options. You could go to gunnery school, you could go to armor school, you could go to air mechanic school, or you could go to radio school. Well, I was hurt. I had planned to be an officer. So I said, shoot, I'll just go to gunnery school. And they sent what few of us there to Las Vegas. A week later, the boys that had signed up for the other 3, they was down there too. I just got a week ahead of them on gunnery. We didn't know why they cut us out, and really today I don't, but it wasn't long till we had D-Day, and I think they anticipated losing a lot more than what they did, and we were ready. I like 1 week I could have gone, 1 week after D-Day. I was that close to being through gunnery school. Plane, and we was always anxious for somebody to shoot the cable loose so that it'd lose the target and we wouldn't have to shoot anymore. But we also had targets that was on the railroad. They would come around, and you had to shoot a moving target. And your bullets, each person had a different colored bullet, and when you looked at the targets, you could tell where you'd hit and where the other fellow hadn't hit. We did a lot of shoulder shooting with shotguns at clay pigeons. Oh, I think 1 week we did shot 75 rounds each day for a week. And your shoulder got pretty sore. And a lot of it, you'd be in the back end of a pickup truck, and you'd be going, I think they said 30, 35 mile an hour. I'm not positive about that. But anyhow, you ran a route, and they had these, each one of these, they had different stations that they'd throw these pigeons out. And you only got one shell. You'd shoot, and then you had to grab this shell, and you'd have to be ready for the next target. So it was, they had us pretty well trained by the time we got out of there. And I went from there to Lincoln, Nebraska, and at Lincoln they assigned you to a crew. You had no idea who you was going to get, and I was assigned to a crew as a top turret gunner. And we were sent to Dyersburg, Tennessee for overseas training. And I forget, I think it was right at 3 months of training. And 2 weeks before I finished up that, they came down. We had 10 men to the crew at that time. They cut 1 man off the crew, and the crew, each crew was numbered. One would be, of course, be odd and one even. And they cut the top turret gunner out of one plane and the bombardier out of the next one. I got cut out. And the overseas training was about as dangerous as a wartime experience, because all the pilots and everything were green, and we just didn't know anything about flying. And they didn't take as good of the 17. The mechanics things didn't baby them like the boys did when we got overseas. But anyhow, I was taken off that crew and was reassigned. Well, when I was reassigned, I was the old boy. I'd been there. So I went up and told them, I said, I want the tail gun. And that's what I got, and that's how I became a tail gunner. So actually I went over with the second crew I was assigned to. And we left the States. Well, we left, when we left Dyersburg, we went back to Lincoln, and we stayed there till long enough for them to get us ready to go overseas. And a lot of the boys flew over, but I went over on the ship. They sent us to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, and for the staging area. About the 15th or 16th, somewhere along there, of January of 45. See, I've been in there a long time now. Before we left, they put us on the ship, and we went over on the Queen Elizabeth. And one thing odd about that, the Queen Elizabeth would be going one direction, and the Queen Mary would be going the other direction, so that either one of them would ever be on the same course, same time, keep the Germans kind of confused. And we had really no big incident going overseas, except one time we were sitting there eating, and all of a sudden here come all the mess kits off the started sliding off. I grabbed mine, and what it was, they had decided, or the sonar or something had picked up a German sub, and they changed direction. Of course, they did that periodically all the way. It's ever so often they changed, and they would not unload us at a ramp or a wharf. We unloaded, we got the Firth of Clyde, which was in Scotland, and we docked out in the middle, and they came in and picked us up off smaller boats and carried us in, put us on a train. We went to Camp Stone, England, and at Camp Stone then they decided where we were going to go, because at that time we didn't go as a group, we were going as replacements. And I was sent to Sherwood, England, the 305th Bomb Group. B-17, if I remember right, the wingspan was 103 or 105 foot, and I believe the body of the plane was about 75 foot. There was no accommodations in it whatsoever. It was strictly a bare plane. There was no, the pilot had a seat, the co-pilot had a seat. We each had a seat, but except the waist gunners. The waist gunners didn't have a seat. It was that was the major part of your plane, was the waist rather. The nose compartment, there was 2 people in the nose compartment, and that was the navigator and the bombardier. And the next 2 positions was the pilot and the co-pilot, and right behind the co-pilot and the pilot was the engineer and top turret gunner. He was top when he wasn't helping with instruments, and when we got into combat area, he went into the top turret gunner. Then you left that compartment and you had the Bombay door, and Bombay, I don't remember the length of that, but we normally carried 12 500-pound bombs, and the catwalk was about a foot wide, and you had 2 little ropes down through there that you could hold on to as you walked. And you left that compartment, you went into a small compartment, the radio compartment. And it was about, I'd say, 10 foot long, and then you stepped out of it. Now, these had doors. They had a door. The only doors we had, wait a minute, up to that point, was when you left when you got to the Bombay, there was a door there. You went through the Bombay, then there was another door, and this was the radio compartment. And early on, the radio operator fired guns, but when I was there, they didn't. And then you went through another door, and you immediately came to the ball turret gunner, which was underneath. Then you had your 2 waist gunners, and then you had to crawl to where I was at back in the back. And let's see, we had 2 guns in the nose. We had 2 guns in the top turret, 2 guns in the ball turret. We had 2 guns in the waist and 2 guns in the tail. And while I was there, we cut out the waist gunners, so that took 2 guns away from us. I was fortunate I got there after the bad part. We didn't have many fighter attacks, so we didn't have to have that many gunners. Well, we were a very diverse crew, I'll say that. I'm trying to think where there was. A navigator was from Wisconsin. Bombardier was from Texas. The pilot and the co-pilot were from Texas. The radio operator was from Iowa. Ball turret gunner was from Utah. Top turret gunner was from Pennsylvania. Waist gunner was from Pennsylvania, and I was an Arky. I flew my first combat mission on the 25th of February, 1945. We were supposed to pull 35 missions, and the war ended, and I didn't have to pull that many. I pulled 20. But I vividly remember the first mission I went on because I was gung-ho. 19 now, boy, I'm growing. And I was wanting in it. I was wanting to kill somebody and get a bunch of medals. And we got it on auction. You went on auction at about 10 to 14,000 feet, depending. Later, I went on at 10,000 to begin with, but I found out I could hold off till the 14,000 feet. But anyhow, when we crossed the English Channel, that we always test fired our guns to make sure that they was in operating condition. That first day I fired my guns, everything's all right. Now it's beautiful, beautiful. The weather's beautiful, and we're going to Munich, Germany, and I'm sitting in the tail and I can't see anything of what's happening in front. And finally, we hit the IP point, which is where you start your bomb run, initial point, and it's from the initial point till you drop your bombs, nothing happens. You stay on level. It's turned over to the bombardier, and you fly straight and level no matter what happens. You can't, no diversion. And I'm sitting back there, and everything's just going just fine. I did nothing to this. And then the nose gunner up there, incidentally, we went to a nose gunner instead of a bombardier after we got overseas. He toggled the bombs. I'll get to that later. But anyhow, he started calling off, said, there's flak at 12 o'clock. A little bit, he said, we got a little bit of flak out here at 3, and a little bit, he said, flak at 10. And little bit, he says, heck, says, flak's all around us. Well, but then I knew it. It was coming up there. There wasn't nothing to it, just beautiful little puffs, mushroom-type puffs in anything. And I still didn't think anything. And they said, bombs away, and I leaned over. There's a little hole right where my spent shells went down, and I could lean over and look through it and watch the bombs fall. So I leaned over, and we got hit, and you definitely can tell when your plane's hit. And when I raised back up, there was a hole here, and there was a hole over here. And just a little bit, I looked at the group behind us, and they lost a couple of planes. Well, they'd give us a flak suit to put on, and I couldn't get mine on. But I didn't worry about it because it wasn't going, nothing happened. But when we landed, I immediately knew how, because I went to that next plane to me, and I asked that tail gunner how he got into that flak suit. So I found out that day, I said, oh boy, you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, and there ain't no way you can get out of this. You're just going to have to live through it. And that was a startling moment. In other words, I realized then what a war was on. That's when I knew World War II was on. We went to eat about 3 o'clock in the morning, and we'd go down the line, go through interrogation, then we'd go out to the plane and wait for the rest of them, then we'd get ready to go. Well, they gave us originally it was a British ration, but I didn't get those but just 4 or 5, and then they came up and they gave us a packaged dentine gum, and a either Snicker or Milky Way for lunch. Well, I always put mine up and wait till we come off the target area, because that took about, it would be 5 or 6 hours before we'd get off the target area coming home. And one day we was going, I told you we had heated suits, and one part, I don't remember which part of my heated suit failed, and I had to go up to the radio room where the spare parts was. Well, I got up there, and my radio operator was sitting there, and he's eating his candy bar. And I said, Hager, I said, you're eating that awful early. You're going to be hungry before we get back, aren't you? He said, well, I'll tell you one thing. If I get shot down, said, those doggone so-and-so Germans not going to get my candy bar. So we had a little levity when we went into on it, but he was serious. We had to drop chaff, which was nothing in the world, but if you ever put tinsel on a Christmas tree, that's what it was. And you put that stuff out, and it separated, and each one of them made a blimp on the radar to mess up German radar. Well, Hager was the one that put it out. Well, it came by the tail. I could hear it. And we'd be going into a target, and they'd tell them to start dropping chaff. And I'd hear it. You'd go whoosh, a little bit, whoosh. And then they'd start telling about the flak, where it was, and this and that and that, and it'd be whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. And then we'd be starting getting hit, and you could feel it, and it'd be coming by me, whoosh, 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 whoosh. He ended it in a hurry. You could tell just as well his emotions by the amount of chaff he was dropping. Oh, nothing like it. I came home on a Liberty boat, and it was horrible, horrible weather. One of the biggest storms they said they had in North Atlantic in quite a while. And there was 2 ships left out together, and when we came out of the English Channel, we hit the storm, and our sister ship lost the prop, so they turned around and went back, and we came on. And we were supposed to have been here in 8 days, and it took us 14 days. I was sick. I'd never been air sick but one time. I got seasick. Oh, I got seasick. We didn't get out of the hold for one time for 6 days because it was washing the decks. We was cramped in there like sardines, and I literally mean sardines. But when we came into New York Harbor, it was on, I think, let's see, I got out on Thursday, so it had been about the 27th of January. We came in that harbor, and every boat, every tugboat, every ship, when we went by them, we got 3 toots from that, and there's so many of us leaning on the side of that thing, it's one we didn't sink looking at the Statue of Liberty. Prettiest sight that ever you've seen was the Statue of Liberty. It's the greatest nation in the world. I'd go back in a minute. I don't believe that we will ever see the patriotism we had then. It wasn't just the people in the service, it was the people at home. If people had to see what the other countries go through, how they're subjected to different rules and regulations, and then see what we've got. Can't be compared.
I became a Marine October the 15th, 1943, and I served in the Pacific. And October the 29th, I boarded a train in Little Rock, Arkansas for the boot camp in San Diego. We went out there in one of those old steam engines. And I'll never forget having arrived there. We had to walk for a long time because it was a troop train. And we got there, one of them fixing to come through Arkansas right now, I think. When we arrived on the scene, I walked by that steam engine, and the wheels are bigger than I am in height. But it's an unforgettable experience to have gone through all that. I can close my eyes and recapture the feeling I had, my frame of mind, and the abuse a Marine Corps recruit is going to take back in World War II. The things are different. attitude of American citizens. We had no fear. We knew about their U-boats, but we thought it was so remote, no one was actually scared. And I just thought, well, this will be over soon because we were with the Germans before, and we'll do it again. And it wasn't quite easy the second time around, you know. Germans are smart people. They're military-minded. I think they probably still are.
The question was,
I knew very little about the war on the German front. I'd just read in the paper. Now, we'd take the Memphis Press Scimitar maybe once a week, and we'd read that. And we'd read, see where Japanese were fighting against China, and we'd see all those things in the paper. And the Japanese seemed to be such a dominant force, we sort of had a better feeling toward China. And we were playing ball in our front yard, and I didn't even quit bouncing the ball because I didn't think it'd be of any consequence. When that happened, I was still in high school, and we didn't know how near we came to disaster. That's only. Our outfit went to Kwajalein and Eniwetok, which was a piece of cake, as it were. Every boy told some kind of story about it, and most of them were exaggerated. Then from there, my own outfit went to the Marianas. That's Saipan and Tinian. And most of my outfit was killed there. I believe there were 8 in the machine gun platoon. I was the only one to survive because I didn't hit the beach. And then later, after Saipan and Tinian, our outfit went to Iwo Jima with the 5th Marine Division, 4th Marine Division, I think the 5th Marine Division. And that's where that picture comes from up there. That's where Simon Bolivar Buckner of the 10th Army, he was killed in Okinawa. Just a little atoll out from Okinawa, I think. But the boy that took my place, his name was Phillips. He was also killed. Now that makes a big story. But I was no part of combat. I knew about it, and I can relate it probably as well as almost any Marine, because we're dying now 1,000 a day. World War II veterans are dying 1,000 a day. And you figure that out, how many die each year. It begins to narrow down. And that's why, having been aboard those ships, LCI, LSTs, transport ships, I went over on a USS transport ship, Santa Monica. I came back on a carrier escort, USS Barnes. And what I guess the thing I remember most is when my outfit was to ship out, I would go to church, to a chaplain. Every Sunday I'd go down to the church building, or we called it something else. It was just a Quonset hut. And there'd be 5 or 6 in there. And then I went down one Sunday and I had all those crosses out there. Our outfit was fixing to go to Saipan and Tinian. All those crosses were out there. That Sunday, you couldn't get people in there. They just packed that place. But anyone, when they think they're about to face death, they're going to think about their Lord, and so they did. We hiked one day for 21 miles. I've been limping now for 60 years. We hiked 21 miles. I limped all the way from our camp to Trade Winds on the Isle of Maui, which at that time was our rear echelon. On the way back, they noticed I limped. A few days later, they called me out to go to IA Hospital number 10 for subsequent surgery, which actually, I guess that part saved my life. Oh, a number of little things are involved right there. But an unforgettable thing that happened, I told this last Sunday, so it's fresh on my mind. 2 or 3 others were on the LCI with me that day. And there's a boy sat over to my right in a straitjacket. His name was Flaherty. It said Flaherty. And he'd look and stare into space. He'd been shell-shocked. And they'd give him a cigarette. They asked him one time, "What do you want?" He said, "Smoke." That's all he ever said. And the image of that boy sitting there, completely shell-shocked, I'll never forget that. I don't know what happened to Flaherty. Somewhere, they may have given him therapy. I'm satisfied he's not living now, because a trauma like that, a person, I think, never really gets over it. I don't think they do. Well, I was in the quiet room with a Navy chief who had a leg missing. Now, you talk about gnashing teeth. He'd wake me at night gnashing his teeth. But when you have problems of your own, somehow you minimize the pain others are in. And those LSTs blew up down there. And you had it accurate a while ago. I heard the explosion. I hobbled to the window. I could see the smoke. They started bringing them in on the back of trucks up there. IE Hospital number 10, I think I mentioned that already. I was in a rest camp. After I'd had surgery at IE Hospital, they sent me to Camp Kokakaya. And that was out near Kaneohe Naval Air Base. That's where the Japanese bombed before they bombed Pearl Harbor. People stood on the Pali out there and they watched it. The Pali is the highest place on the island of Oahu. I mean, it goes way up high, maybe 5,000 feet above sea level. And they saw those planes bombing. They thought it was a show the Navy was putting on. And just minutes later, they flew right across. And it wasn't more than a 5-minute trip across there to Pearl Harbor when they bombed Pearl Harbor. So it was a trying thing. Natives, people there would tell you about those things. And I could piece it together. I still remember one time going from one island to another, and I was right under a gun turret. And that gun turret, they fired that thing. An airplane flew over pretty high, like it was an enemy craft. They started shooting at that thing. He was dragging a target. And of course, they didn't tell us at that moment. We thought it was real, I guess. It was an enemy. They do that sometime after night at Pearl Harbor. When I first went to Pearl Harbor, the lights were all out all over the island. And trucks had the headlights were covered where you could just have a slit that would go right down to the road. And anytime you'd see a truck go down the road, you could just see the light coming out of that slit. And so if enemy craft had flown over, they couldn't have seen that truck down there, I don't think. I won't forget, behind us, there were 2 big Quonset huts. And in that, they had those 155 howitzers. That's one of those real big guns. We knew when they were going to fire those things, just practice. Because at that time I was working in the office. And one night, knowing they were going to do it, I went down to the latrine. If you're in the Navy or Marine, Marine's part of the Navy. You didn't call it latrine, you called it a head. I went down the head and a little pea gravel was everywhere. I picked up 2 handfuls, and when those guns went off, I threw that stuff up on top. Up on top of that Quonset hut, and those boys came out there. They thought sure when that thing fired, shrapnel would hit them out there, and I threw that up there just for fun. You do have a little fun along the way after you become accustomed to military life. When we hiked from our camp area on the eastern side of Maui, which was the rear echelon for the 4th Marine Division, all the way to trade winds, and my knee went out on me. I'd stumble along, and boys were being hauled back, and I thought, I'm not going to fake it. If I fall out, they can come and get me. If I don't fall out, I'm going to walk. So they sent me to the hospital. I didn't volunteer to go. I wouldn't have gone. You have to know the atmosphere in service. They make fun of you back then. And they put up little signs in the dispensary, a sick bay we called it. They put up signs and make fun of you. And so I developed an antipathy about that, even to this day. I was down at Veterans Administration last week to check in. And they treated me so royally down there, I couldn't believe it. They just simply rolled the red carpet out for me. But they didn't do it during World War II. In the Marine Corps, you rationed out. Air Force got #1 rations. Navy probably got 2nd rations. Seabees or Army engineers probably got 3rd rations. That's how they parcel out food. Marine Corps got #4. Sorriest food ever. They thought they had to toughen you up, and that was just part of the way of doing things for a Marine, toughen you up and give you a hard time. Boys would have fought their drill instructor, or you would have fought your man. One boy, one time I know we were training for combat, and when they'd ought to hit the deck, we'd run with the rifles, and he ought to hit the deck. You're supposed to hold your rifle out like that and down below the butt of your rifle like this. He didn't do it right, and he broke his the stock on his rifle, a .30 caliber M1. He looked up at me, and I don't use this expression ever, but I'll use it right at this moment. He said, "Christ, Pace, I'll be court-martialed." It scared him to death. His name was Wilbur from Ohio. Well, they probably did try to scare him to death. One, he hadn't taken his own life. But they gave him another rifle, and that was about the end of it. Much of it, I would say, was loneliness. And every service personnel, every person, Marine, regardless, some old boy that had it rough back home, he may have enjoyed it. He may have had his moments of pleasure. Those in the Air Force, they may have enjoyed it. Unless they were in the air fighting, they probably didn't so much, but big talk about it, you know. But all the heroes, everyone fears for their life. Everyone fears for their life. I would say just actually feeling lonely, missing home, missing my fiancée, writing her letters, not getting too many from her. She said she wrote me every day. If she did, I didn't get that many. And I didn't write her. I wrote her nearly every day, I guess. But I think virtually everybody could say the same thing. Just being away from home and lonely. You vowed to stay in touch when you get back home. Oh, we'll be in touch, we'll be in touch. You forget the whole thing when you get home about being in touch. I got a friend in Haxton, Colorado named Grover Clark. I'd like to see old Grover. I wrote him a letter. He never did answer it. But he could. I thought he was old. He was 33 years old and I was 20. I thought he was an old man. He missed his family. He'd get drunk. He would drink ethyl alcohol mixed with water. He would drink anything in the world that had alcohol content, including shoe polish. He'd drink anything. He'd just be as wild as a March hare sometime when he'd come in from getting drunk. Boys go to town. You know, you were taught if you're Marine Corps, you can whip 3 or 4 sailors and 2 or 3 Army men because you're better trained. Well, that's not true. Those old boys, they can fight too, you know. We had a fellow named Overton H. Barry. He had a flower shop on Kings Highway in St. Louis. Barry went to town one day and he picked a fight with a top sergeant. This top sergeant didn't want to mess with him. Barry was drunk and this top sergeant wasn't. And Norbert H. Barry, he kept picking at him, fussing at him all the time. And finally he looked at old sergeant and said, "Look, I'm passing the place where I'm supposed to get off, but I want to follow you on down there where you get off, and then we're going to fight." And that top sergeant kept telling him, "No, we don't want to fight, we don't want to fight." Got down there. Barry picked a fight with him, and that top sergeant just beat him to a pulp. He came back to camp, and I wish you could have seen him. I kind of wanted to remind him of it when I came back through St. Louis and stopped and went to the Kiwanis Club with him, and he introduced me, and we talked a good bit. But I always remember Barry showing out. We came back on the USS Barnes Carrier Escort. It had the deck up there. I mean, carry escort. The runway was not very long, but it had those planes in there where they had the wings sticking. You know, they'd buckle them up. But when we got aboard that ship, I was limping back then, and we sailed out of Pearl Harbor. That was a feeling unbelievable that you experience. Think I'm going home. We hadn't been in the sea 2 hours. I got just seasick, so seasick. I stayed seasick, I believe, nearly all the way. I never forget lying there in bed, and those corpsmen would come in. We didn't call them medics, we called them corpsmen. They were Navy men. And they said, I'll tell you what, that boy's sick. Just let him alone, let him alone. And I heard them whispering over there. I thought, they may want to throw me overboard. I don't care if they do, just anything. I was that sick. And after about 4 days, 5 days, everything got still. I got up and went out on the deck of that ship, and there was a Golden Gate Bridge. And over here was Alcatraz Island. And over there was Treasure Island. And back over to my right, I could see up the hill in San Francisco. San Francisco wasn't all that big back then. That was nearly 60 years ago. It wasn't all that big. Anyway, when we got out and went back across the bay and over to Treasure Island, where I was subsequently discharged, right next door. I don't know when I said next door, there was a stockade, and German prisoners were over there. I can still see those old German generals and all those men. They were restless, just marched to and fro, to and fro. I mean, they could never be still. And I also remember the first time, maybe in 3 years, I got a decent meal. I mean to tell you, we'd go down and just eat and eat and eat. And then we caught a train, finally. We went across Salt Lake, come to think of it. And then we'd stop periodically where the USO would have places where you could get something to eat. And finally we got to Great Lakes Naval Training Center, was that what it was called? And that's where I was discharged. In Chicago. Little tidbits that I wouldn't have to mention, but when you prod me a little bit, it comes back to me, you know. I had $500 or $600 checking out pay, and I put that in a locker and forgot to lock it. And I'll tell you, it just like to roll me up the wall. I think I'd lost all my money. I'd finally put it together, thought I knew just about where it was. I went back and opened that up, and my money was still there. When I got home, my wife met me at Newport, Arkansas. We got off that train, and she was standing there and didn't recognize me, and I was just carrying a duffel bag. I just slid that thing right up by her, and she saw who I was. Man, I was glad to see her. We drove out to my home community. She took me out there. We drove up to the house. And the first time ever in our community, while I was gone, they ran electricity through our community. And I walked in and my mother turned on the light. Boy, that bright light, really fascinated.
Hi, my name is George Hughes. I was born in 1924 here in Benton on River Street, 315 River Street, and was born at home. My parents were Doris and Walter Hughes. Walter was the youngest son of the George Hughes family, who were longtime members of this church. In December of '42, I went to Peoria, Illinois, and volunteered for the Army Air Corps with a 4-year deferment. Well, that deferment only lasted until February of '43. We went to Chicago for physical, and from there we took a 10-day train ride to Miami Beach. for basic training. I think we went through every land grant railroad in the Middle West, or middle of the country, to get to Florida. After basic training, to put us in a pool for future service, 600 of us went to Slippery Rock State Teachers College in Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania. And there we usually had a 3-mile march through those beautiful hills of western Pennsylvania. And we had classes, but I only had to take the class for the aeronautical rules and regulations. But the purpose of the aircraft we flew out of Hershey, Pennsylvania, was to see whether or not we as individuals could tolerate an aircraft without getting sick or disoriented. After the pool was needed for further classification, we went to Nashville, Tennessee for classification, and at that point they classified you as a pilot or a navigator or a radio or gunnery or something of that nature. I was fortunate enough to be selected as a pilot, and of course took the battery of tests and so on and so forth. Then I was assigned to primary flight school in Arcadia, Florida, and there we flew Stearman PT-17s, which was a bi-wing aircraft. We learned to solo, we learned to navigate, we learned to make stage landings, which is you come in over a fence and see how close you can drop the aircraft over the fence. I did catch a wing one day, a wing tip, and the other guys told me that they had to catch my instructor because he was going to come out and clean my plow real good for getting a wing tip. But Florida was a nice assignment. From there we went to Montgomery, Alabama to Gunther Field and flew BT-13s. There we did a lot of spin work. We had an allotment of spins that we had to do. I got behind, and one day I went up and I did 14 spins, one right after another. A spin is where the aircraft, you put it in an intentional spiral, and one wing is down, and you learn to recover the aircraft by the controls of the rudder and the stick. Usually you pop the stick to break the spin and then lift your wing up. The first time I was in an airplane, about 1932, I believe it was, I was 8 years old, and a barnstormer came through and used our pasture, which was in a 1,200-acre farm south of Benton across the river. Well, it was 50 cents a ride, but my dad told the pilot, you know, you're on our land, how about giving my boy a ride? So we went for about a 10-minute buzz around the city of Benton, which was pretty small at that time, of course. And from Montgomery, Alabama, I went to Selma, Alabama, Craig Field, where I graduated in AT-6s. AT-6 was a North American aircraft, radial engine, cruise about 245, 250. And there we got extensive flight training, instruments, night flying, navigation. I was very successful there with one exception. We had a cross-country flight for navigation to go to the northern part of Alabama for our first checkpoint, and we had a triangle course that we were to fly. I missed my checkpoint. Well, there were forest fires, and I just missed it. So I got lost in northwestern Alabama, and I went on cruise control, or went on emergency flight control. I reduced my power, reduced the speed of the prop, and I was nursing gasoline. We had about 4.5 hours of gas, and I finally found a railroad that I could identify and flew in and landed at Birmingham Municipal Airport, where they had 826s, and they discovered that I only had 2 gallons of gas left. So I had thought about bailing out, when you're lost, but I didn't. So I went in the flight room, and they called Craig Field and said, "We've got one of your dumb cadets here. He got lost." And my flight instructor said, "Gas him up, draw him a line on the map, and send him home." So from that day on, when I flew, I had a map, and I knew exactly where I was at all times. So it was quite a lesson. For punishment, I was given a sectional flight map, which was about 3.5, 4 feet wide, and about 2.5 feet high on a piece of cardboard with a map on it, and it said, fog in the cockpit, he was smoking. I guess in my flying time I had a guardian angel, and I really believe that, because I had, in flying T6s, I pulled some dumb stunts that just common sense would tell you don't ever try this. I know I recalled one day I had a student in my back seat. We were going out to one of the auxiliary fields, and I thought I'd show off, being 19 and raunchy, I guess. I came flying across the field and got all the airspeed I could do, pulled it up into a full loop, dropped my wheels and flaps as I started out of the loop, and then landed without going in through a pattern. So a couple of days later, I was showing a student what I had done, and in 5 attempts I came out at altitude less than what I had started. So, that's just, I know I had a guardian angel that day when I pulled that dumb stunt. But I didn't fly under the bridge at Selma, and I didn't buzz the river and get caught with wires. It's just, that was the only dumb stunt I guess I ever pulled. And it was fun instructing, except at night. Night instruction was a little bit hairy. We flew a Diamond, 3-aircraft Diamond, and the aircraft had an exhaust on the right side. The stack was on the right side. So whoever was on your right wing, when they came in, they could see where you were. But on the left wing, when the left wingman came in, all he had was a navigational light. So you're sitting there in your turn, and he's turning inside of you, which allows him to gain and get in position. Then you come up and you just hope that he stops and doesn't run into you. You're sitting there ready to pop out in the opposite direction if he comes sliding in too fast. But that was fine. I had good students. They learned well and followed instructions well. Yeah, there were 3 or 4 of us, classmates. I had worked at Lone Star Cafe that night, that Saturday night, Friday and Saturday night. I was a sandwich maker. Lone Star used to be across from the courthouse, and we were down at the fish trap. I don't know if you know where that is or not, but it's where they dammed up the Saline River for the water for Benton. There was a low water bridge or a low water dam, and we used to swim there, and we were down there just sort of up on the hill, just chatting and visiting, and someone knew where we were, and they came out and said, Pearl Harbor has been attacked, and we couldn't believe it, of course. But that we were out at the fish trap. I think there were 5 or 6 of us. Good grief, you got mad to think that without provocation to have a sneak attack like that. I think it means a great deal. You have the advantage of a solid government. You have the advantage of religious freedom. You have all the opportunities available to you, only limited by your desire and skills. Of course, the elected officials must have the integrity and the honesty and the fortitude and the skill to run the government in the manner that it should be run in. They must have the will to protect the rights of the individual. The justice system must be honest, without collusion of any kind. Honesty, I think, more than anything else. You have to have honesty in government. You have to have it in all your relationships.
I'll tell you, I don't remember my dad. I was a year old when he passed away. He was in the Civil War. And when World War II or III come up, II, they called me in the Army. Now, I didn't know a soul, anybody. They sent me to medical school, and I went into it, and I done the best I could. I got to save 3 guys' lives and got wounded twice myself. 3 years. Slept with your clothes on. And they would bring us little old box of stuff to eat. We carried that with us. Too many years. I'll tell you, I'll never forget it as long as I live. We started in here, and when it was over, we was out the other end, ready to come home. And then we went over on the biggest ship that I had. Well, I'll tell you, there was 2 of us. We was walking along. We just followed up behind the people that had their guns and things like that, and we heard the sound there and the thing while we go to it. We was walking along and they was open in the bushes there, and 2 medics had been shot right through the head there. And we looked at them, and boy, that put a scare to us. But we didn't get shot at or anything like that, but we could hear guns and things going off, and we just stayed together all the time. But we were going along, and I heard somebody say, I heard a bomb go off. And they dropped the bomb. Well, we was about, I'd say, nearly a quarter of a mile, last quarter of a mile. And I said, you just stay here. We had a foxhole there. And I said, I'll just go up there and see what it is. Crossroads. 2 boys, and they dropped a bomb there, and these boys looked to be about 14 or 15 years old. Of course, I know they're older than that. And they were laying on the left side, and the foot, both of them, both feet was laying they was laying that way, and their face was that way. Well, I ran back down there and got my stuff and tape. I had some wide tape, and I taped the legs together, and went back and saw a guy. I told him, I said, we got to have a wagon up here. Go get a buggy. Well, they had a little cart, gasoline anyway. And he said he got on the phone and he got up, run up there, come up there to pick them up, take them back, kill both of them. Boy, that's something else. And then here, we was coming back on the road there and been away up there and come back, and Captain done like this. I knew what that was, just stop. I stopped and I saw them 90mm pointed down on the hill there. Directly said, boom. And then he said, come on up. We come on up there and killed the big boy, and the young one, I swear to God, he wasn't that high, and he's about this thick, and spoke as good of me English as I did. And there were little scratches on him, and I doctored him off, and it was good, and put him in a Jeep up there, and I had him beside him, and I told him, I talked nice to him, and I doctored him up, and we took him where the Germans was, and other ones were cased in other places. You didn't mix them, you didn't put them together. And got down there, and he said, I told him, I said, now, I'll tell you what, I've been good to you, and I hope you never have a war again, and it's nice for me to pick you up and bring you down here where you can go back home. And he hugged me, went to crying. Almost got me to doing it. It's pitiful. And then there's a great big place over there where there's about 50 in there, cased in there. And they told me to go around, and I didn't carry a gun, couldn't carry a gun. Well, I found one where he was digging a hole to get out. And I went up and told him. I said, I'm not going around that way anymore. I said, there's one guy up there digging a hole to get out. I said, it's got it about that deep now and about that long. So they sent a guy around there, and I heard a gun go off. They shot him through the head. I didn't go back down and look at him.
Correct.
Huh?
You were at Bastogne, the Battle of the Bulge?
Oh, yeah. Of course, I wasn't with the guys with carrying the guns or anything. They were over here. I could hear guns firing all the time. And big guns and the bombs busting. But we just travel and listen together. We just two of us. We just travel together. And night come, we never slept a night without the clothes on and sleeping in the ground. We'd dig a hole in the ground and sleep in there, way off from the trail, way off the trail, just because they could look out there and something looked funny, they'd go out there and kick that off over and shoot you. And a guy told us that's what we better do. That's what we done. Now, that's the only time I got wounded was we was going up the highway, and there was a ditch. It must have been 8 or 10 foot deep, and we had the 90mm. And here come one of them big bombers. Well, I didn't go down in there. I went part of the way down in there, and they first throwed a gun on me. They thought I was one of them, a German, and they waited, and then the fellow said, done like that, go ahead, yeah. I got out and we called up there, and the guy, I don't know why he didn't. It went off. I had my little dog in there, he's about that big, and I was bringing home. And they wasn't a place in the back of that where they had shelter over it. That big, what there's a hole in it. And I was thinking, well, it's probably got my little dog. But a guy didn't go down through there. And I told him, I said, why didn't you go down through there? I looked at him. Piece went through here and come out here. Well, I just took my knife and I just split up through there and split up through there, and they give us some tape. If you put it on there, you'd almost have to pull the skin off. I mean, the tape didn't come off. It missed everything in there. They taught me. I know I stopped the blood from killing him. Heck, he come out before we left. He come out and hugged my neck. He said, "You saved my life." And then I got wounded myself, and when I was talking to this big high colonel, what he was, saw a boat coming in there. Well, I never thought about it. Thought it was one of ours, but it might have been. I don't know, and I still don't know. And it come in, and it had got up in the bushes a little ways, and directly it went. It had a forks on it, and it had a bomb on that fork, and it went off, and hit it, went off, and hit that hole up there where I was standing, and he measured, this guy, he was a high-ranking guy, and it just missed him, and he said, I measured it 27 inches deep, and I was in that hole, and blood's in this ear, coming out of my ear. And he said, I think I'd better send you to the hospital. And I said, no, I think it'll be all right. I'm going to take care of it, see. He said, well, I'll just let you be the judge. And if you got the, I wouldn't have gone if they hadn't been but making you go and saving the United States, saving our country. That's what it is. And I doubt if we ever have another one like that. But they got better stuff now than they had then. But I can say one thing. I know I ain't going to tell it.
Go ahead.
No, I was a medic. I couldn't carry a gun. But I saved a guy's life. Well, I'll tell you, I heard some guns up there going off once in a while, a crack. Mom and Dad don't know it. And, they had big timber over there. And I got behind some of them big trees, and I got listening, and I was about a little further than here's the road out there, and big old tree, and about that far up there was another big old tree, and there was boys at this tree, and one at that German boy at that other, and they're shooting at each other. And I thought, I'm not supposed to use a gun. The medic's not supposed to use a gun. I'm not supposed to even tell it. But I broke some little bushes, flowers, things down like that, and I watched them. They'd peep around there, and they'd shoot and the other would shoot him. And I knew one of them was an American boy, and he was the ones I was going for. And that other one, he was a German. He of course shooting. I never told him about it. Well, I got up there, and of course I was raised with a gun in my hand, and I got behind this boy, was American boy, and got his gun. Don't tell this to anybody. I wasn't supposed to do that. I was a medic. And I stuck them in there, and that old boy stuck his head in there and got it higher, and then directly I let him have it. Went up there, and about half his head was gone. German guy. No, I done it myself and I was a medic. No, I shouldn't even have told it. But that little boy would have got killed as sure as 2 and 2 is 4. I think I saved his life. That German boy was after him, and he didn't know how to handle a gun. That's the first time they ever heard me tell it. That's the only time I ever done anything like that. I wasn't supposed to pick up a gun. Medics don't do that. Well, you was expecting to run over a mine, or step on one, or getting shot, or dropping a bomb on you. That's the only thing we dreaded, because we stayed away from where the guns were shooting. We just, if they got where, we just back up and go out, because all we could do was take care of the cripple, and that's what we done. We went from one end, we landed on the beach, and we come out on the other end. And the guy that told me, he said he said he was going to take his dog home then, and I said I was going to too. And exactly, he told me, he said, Charlie, we can't take him home. And he was right. Well, he wasn't right either. He thought, I guess they told him they couldn't. But we went to the far end. The war was over. Caught a ship. 5 days coming back across the ocean. And got up there, and this guy was with me. He said, find them like that. He said, look at them guys. They had the barracks bag over that, and they saw the dogs kicking in there. And he said, see what we done? I told my buddy there, I said, see what we done? We just turned our dogs loose. Should have kept them with us. Yeah, they said, got anything from a monkey to an elephant, bring it on.